When selling a house, if a death occurred within 3 years of the house going on the market, the seller is required to inform potential buyers of said death. This little requirement wasn't necessary in my case. Everyone within a 50-mile radius seemed to know about Victoria Teller. It was a tragic story. She had given birth to a bouncing baby boy whose father no one seemed to know. The baby passed away just a few months later, and Victoria took her own life a year after that. That much was known to be true. What was unknown were the circumstances surrounding the incidents, how the baby died. Some said it was an accident, some said it was an illness, some said it was even murder. How Victoria killed herself and what happened in between. The popular rumor was that Victoria, in her grief-stricken psychosis, began buying dolls to replace her dearly departed son. The doll would then suffer the same fate as the real baby in her mind, and she would bury it and move on to another. People, mostly teenagers, made it a Halloween tradition to search for the doll graveyard. They searched the backyard and the woods behind it, but nothing was found in the 6 years that the house was empty. I was confident that the house that I had bought for my family and me had nothing strange in its history but 2 tragic deaths. The first few months living in the Teller house were uneventful. I had to occasionally shoo away curious locals that weren't aware that our house was no longer empty, but I had found no ghost or satanic symbols anywhere or anything like that. It seemed that it was just a house, one that I got a huge discount on because of what happened there and the bad juju it was rumored to have acquired because of it. By the time Christmas season rolled around, I had pretty much forgotten about Victoria Teller. It was the first year my cousin, my son, Caleb, was really aware of anything other than presents. We lined the roof and windows with lights hung on a wreath on the door, and put some standing decorations on the lawn. We bought and decorated a big tree, enough to fit a toy store underneath it, but which was appropriate because of how many presents Santa was going to bring Caleb that year. He was getting more excited each day, especially since we had been dropping some pretty big hints that he was getting a puppy. My family was the happiest it had ever been until a week before Christmas. My wife had been wrapping presents as we bought them so that we didn't have to stay up all night on Christmas Eve like we had in the previous years. She had opened the door to the closet that held the presents to find the wrapping paper torn to shreds. Her first thought was that had Caleb gotten into them, but I doubt that he would be able to contain his excitement if he had. It looked almost as if some sort of rodents had shredded the paper, but the boxes weren't damaged at all. We brushed it off. It was just a mystery, and we moved on. The presents in the attic, we moved them to there after rewrapping them. I occasionally heard some shuffling from inside the closet, but I never saw whatever critter had caused it. I figured I would call an exterminator after Christmas to check inside the walls. Soon things started to get really strange. I walked into the bathroom to find dirty clothes scattered around the room and a hamper on its side. My wife found the refrigerator door hanging open with food torn up and thrown on the floor. Caleb was distraught one morning when he woke up to find all the toys that he had carefully placed in his toy box the night before had been thrown all around his room while he slept. All this, and then the noises in the walls, they were getting more frequent and were heard everywhere in the house. My superstitious wife was becoming scared that the local urban legend was true, that Victoria Teller had still haunted this house. She reasoned that the spirit was becoming more active because we were so happily preparing for the holiday with our son, something she never got to do. I laughed at her theory. I shouldn't have. Christmas Eve, my wife and I put Caleb to bed. We had to return to his room several times to tell him that if he didn't go to sleep, Santa would bring him nothing. When I was convinced that he was finally going to stay in his bedroom, I picked the puppy up from my mother's house and brought it home. We hadn't named him yet, but He was a golden retriever puppy that was as energetic as he was soft and fluffy. After playing with him for a while, we put him to bed in a crate, ate the cookies Caleb left for Santa, and turned in for the night. I was jerked from my slumber by a blood-curdling scream. My wife and I followed our son's cries for help to the living room. Caleb had snuck out of bed and found the puppy. Instead of the happy fluff ball that we had left by the tree, he found a mangled metal crate filled and surrounded by fur, blood, and chunks of discarded meat. My wife took Caleb into another room to console him while I checked for intruders and signs of a break-in. I found nothing, so I returned to the living room and began cleaning up the mess. I was kneeling on the floor, convincing myself that there was a silver lining in the fact that we had hardwood floors instead of carpet, when I heard the tinkling noise from the tree. I turned my head just in time to see a pair of big blue eyes staring back at me through the branches. I jumped to my feet and backed up a few paces just as the first doll dropped from the tree. It was followed by 3 others. They were those delicate porcelain dolls wearing what was probably pretty little dresses at one time. I couldn't tell because the dresses were covered in dirt and blood. I watched with a mixture of terror and disbelief as all 4 of the dolls slowly rose from the ground and started towards me. The screams of my wife and son snapped me out of my horrified trance. The dolls' heads turned as I ran from the room to find my family. I raced back up the stairs to my bedroom, where I found my wife standing on our bed with Caleb in her arms. Dozens of porcelain dolls, varying in states of damage and filth, were standing on the floor surrounding the bed. They were making their way toward my loved ones with their tiny little arms stretched, trying to stay away. They were reaching for the woman and child who were desperately trying to stay away. I started kicking the little demons out of the way as I hurried to the rescue of my wife and child. I didn't think a bunch of fucking dolls would be so hard to push through, but I was wrong. For every one I kicked away, 4 more of them came at me. They grabbed and pulled and thrashed and bit, and I found myself moving away from the bed instead of towards it. After noticing that most of the dolls had directed their attention to me, I yelled for my wife to run. I hoped that I served as enough of a distraction for the demon toys that her and Caleb could get away unharmed. The dolls that were still trying to reach them were clinging to the sides of the bed, climbing with delicate little hands. My wife jumped off the bed, stumbled, and fell. Caleb's head hit the floor, and the resulting cries caught the attention of many of the dolls I was desperately trying to fight off and keep away. My wife tried to right herself and gather our son before the wave of small monsters got to them, but she was too slow. I watched as the dolls quickly swarmed Caleb and began tearing at his flesh. My wife started trying to get them away, but they turned on her when Caleb stopped thrashing. I made my way to them just as my wife stopped fighting. I saw the despair in her eyes as the doll with the black hair and gray tattered dress bit a chunk from her throat. The creatures moved so fast. There were so many of them. We didn't stand a chance. I don't know how long I stood in my bedroom watching a horde of dolls ripping apart the 2 people I love most in the world before I realized I was no longer being attacked. Every porcelain creature was crowded around what was left of my wife and son, feasting on them. I regret what I did next day ever since. I ran. I bounded down the steps as fast as my feet would carry me. I reached the front door when I heard a woman's voice come from the 2nd floor. "That's right, my children. Fill those bellies so you can grow and be strong." I shut the door behind me and fell down those steps on the front porch. After vomiting up cookies I had eaten from earlier that night, I turned to look at the house. Peeking out the window, illuminated by the colorful Christmas lights, was a gaunt woman wearing a tattered black dress. She smiled through a veil of stringy hair as a doll climbed up the front of her dress and into her arms, then closed the curtain.